I will give an overview, just kind of steps on getting access. The defining cohort is the big part of what we are going to talk about, because the query interface is supposed to be intuitive, but it's still not as intuitive as we would like. And then a little bit about data request project and a little bit of plug for my evaluation study. I wanted to give you a really good overview of what's going on. So this is infectious disease repository, which is actually living inside a protected space of UW Clinical Data Repository, which some of you know as AMALGA. Unfortunately, IRB does not allow direct interaction with this data unless you're approved. So in order to give you a chance to get access to the data, we had to basically extract some of the data from there, de-identify it, and put it into a completely new system called De-Identified Clinical Data Repository. And we wrote an IRB on that so that nobody needs to write an IRB to access it. All you need to do is just do that form that you signed yesterday or this morning, that you were not going to use it for bad purposes. And in front of that sits the Cohort Id Interface, which is a web-based interface that you can access anywhere, which is where you will be doing your query. If you're a researcher with the Access Grant, which all of you right now should have, you will get a cohort count after playing with the interface to define what you'd like. And when you want to request the data, we will be basically taking the definition that you developed in the Cohort ID, and we'll be going to the actual database and returning you the data set, so that you now have actual data set instead of de-identified, date shifted. We also have ability to give you the de-identified data, but you might want the actual data. And as Bob explained, the little triangle is a bit of a semi-automated process, which means you'll have to interact with one of us so that we are able to grab data for you. We are going to explain the getting access and defining cohort part today, as well as data request part. Getting access to Cohort Id Interface, we've all gone through this, but if anyone else, your colleagues ask you about this process, just you need to go and sign that you will not use it for bad purposes, and you'll be filling out the form, and you need a UW-Net ID. De-Identified Clinical Data Repository. I will be calling it DCDR, it's a mouthful. So it has a web-based end, which you can interact with. It is de-identified, which means there's no patient identifiers, and each patient has date-shifted dates of everything, including all the labs and encounter dates and all that.
They're different for each patient?
Yes, they're different for each patient, but each patient's data is shifted equal amounts for everything. So technically, that is useful in a sense, because each patient has sort of coherent data of its own. So data elements, which is I think one faculty asked about that. Right now, we have data starting from 2010 onward. It is possible to have more historical data, but that's current status. We have demographics, diagnosis, disposition, labs. Not all the labs, it's a subset, because depending on who's going to use it or request it, we could add some more. We have medication orders, procedures, visit details, which includes all the institution, what type of visit, age at visit info, and vitals. These are inpatient vitals for now. We have ability for others, but currently. And for infectious disease repository, we added these 5 elements, which is being able to query by culture description, and specimen description, as in where it came from, whether the person has the ID node written on him or her, and susceptibility info just for oxacillin for now, because that was our test case, and then whether the person has a transplant diagnosis or procedures on it. If you like to access the query interface to kind of play around with it, please go to this web address. It's pretty easy. And then click on the query interface menu. And it should either ask you to log on, or it will just go straight to the interface. It should look something like this, and I want to orient you to what all these crazy windows are. So these are all the little items that is pertinent to your querying process. However, I'm going to go by one so that you can figure out whether you want to use this or how you can use it. So right now, I'm going to explain the navigate terms and display options, workplace, and previous queries. Those are kind of sort of simpler items. So if you can see on your screen, there's a navigate terms and display options, workplace, previous queries. I didn't have a slide for the display options, so I wanted to show you what it looks like. If you click on this little checkbox, display options, it's got maximum number of children to display, show hidden items in terms. You don't really need to play with anything except for the maximum number of children to display. What does that mean? Is if you click on this little plus sign on the ontology, it should give you a folders. Under those folders are list of terms that are related to those folders. So for example, if you go inside demographics, it should have age, distance from HMC, gender, language. Those are the children of demographics. Some of the folders contain more than 500 children, unfortunately, especially something like infectious disease organism names, because we got about 2,000 plus organism names. So if you actually want to see all of them, you will have to increase the children size from 500 to something like 2,500. Otherwise, you don't really need to touch any of that. That is the options, and the only reason why you need to ever open options. Navigate term is where you will be navigating different terms inside of it if you actually want to see what's inside. The workplace is a place where you can save queries, and I will show you how to do that. Queries that you've run before and you want to kind of save it for yourself. Previous queries is where they automatically save your queries. So it will actually go off and be deleted after a certain point, but it will save it for, a few days or a week, or depending on how many queries you run. Find terms. This is where you might be going most if you're looking for infectious disease organisms or some sort of diagnosis where you don't want to scroll through all the list of items. So if you go to find terms, you will see search by name, search by codes. So search by name is what you could type in anything in that string and it will find any item in that long list of trees where it is. So it will return you a result. For example, if I were to try to find Staphylococcus, that's what we've been testing on, it will return a long list of where Staphylococcus exists. And you can sort of mouse over it and it will tell you where in that tree that Staphylococcus is. So if you want to search within the organism only, you can kind of mouse over it and then you have found it. The category button is used for coding. So for example, if you choose to search by codes, and it's the same interface, so it's a little misleading. So if you're searching by code, you click on a code and it will have coding system. You can search by CPT code, ICD-9 code. NDFRT is something that is related to medication. You might not know what the codes are, but you could search by medication name. So for searching by codes, if you want to say who's a diabetic, you could type in 250, which is ICD-9 code for diabetic, and then you say find, and it will give you a folder with diabetic diagnosis, for example. So if you know the codes, you can search by codes. If you know the names, or if you don't want to bother with the code, or if you don't want to go search through the tree, you could search. So there's 3 methods of going about finding different things. One is go through all the folders and click on tree items if you want to look through them. Second is searching by name. Type in the name you like. Third is searching by code. Next part is how to run a query. So if you found the right item that you wanted to query on, you have to actually put those items into these query boxes. So this is the query window, They do have query options and query tools. And so query tool, just to give you an orientation of what they are, query name has a query name. Temporal constraint, I will explain what that means. Panels are where you can drag and drop the concepts you find, like ICD-9 code concepts or name of the organism that you find. And each of the group have different options. So group is inside the query toolbox. You can choose to exclude things. You could put date ranges on it. You can see if it occurred more than once. You could have multiple items in a group. And I will explain why you would need to do that. The bottom of the query tool contains a button for running, clear, printing queries. New group, you can add multiple groups, as in you could have 5, 6, 7, 8 different groups of definitions. Just a little caveat, the more groups you have, things will take a little longer. Query status will tell you whether query is running, how long it took, and how many people meet your criteria. And query tool option this is the only thing you'll get if you go to query tool option. What DCDR will do, it will run your query for about 3 minutes, 180 seconds default. And then it will say, query timed out, I'm running in the background, which means it's running in the background, but it's not going to do a countdown. As in, you don't have to stare at the screen. It's going to run in the background, and you can come back and look at it from your previous queries. And I will show you what that looks like. So adding concepts. Once you find the concepts, for example, let me go to the query window. Let's say you like to search Staphylococcus, as we've done. And I want to have anybody who had some sort of Staphylococcus. Then I'm going to drag that concept in here. And that means I want everyone who had Staphylococcus as a culture. Anytime in that database, as in 2010 on. You don't probably want 3 years worth of Staphylococcus, so you might want to put date ranges on them. And you can specify a date. So let's say, I don't know, 2002. So 01, 2012, and then, I don't know, 12/31, 2012. That will specify date of Staphylococcus positive. And
is there a visual clue that you put a date there?
the only visual clue here is the little underline on the dates. Unfortunately, since the spacing is so limited, they have no way of displaying that. If you click on it, it will show you what the date range you set. You could also have, yeah, it just became underlined. If you know there's underlines, that means you have set the date range. If you want to know what they are, you have to click on them, and then you'll know. And let's say you want Staphylococcus or Enterococcus, as in anybody with Staph or Enterococcus. Then you want to add the concept in the same window. So let's say, if I can spell this right, that will tell you that anyone who's had Staph or Enterococcus will be selected within 2012. However, if you want to know somebody who had both, as in Enterococcus and Staph, then you want to put the concepts on the right. Unfortunately, you cannot move the concepts from window between the windows. You'll have to delete them, and you can do that by right-clicking and deleting. There are limitations to drag and drop here. So that's what I mean by and or concept on the PowerPoint slide. One thing that I want to give you a little note on if you want to speed up your query, the system runs query very sequentially. It'll go from panel 1 to panel 2, panel 3. So if you could put the most restrictive item on the first panel, as in the least number of people you think is going to go on panel 1, it will save your query time very, very much. So if you don't want to wait there for 5 minutes or like go out for coffee or something, sometimes it happens. I've seen people run 7-panel queries. then put the most restrictive item on the first panel. That would make it much faster. Now the temporal constraint, what are those? So this is where people get a little lost. There's a difference between, did this person have a, I don't know, diagnosis in 2002, as opposed to did this person have diagnosis that I want at a certain visit. So if you're looking for somebody who had diagnosis in January of 2002, inpatient, and you want to make sure that that person had diagnosis at that time, you want to attach what we call temporal constraint, as in it occurred in the same financial encounter, as in the person's contact is when that thing occurred. So this is done by using the temporal constraint, what do you call it, drop-down box. So I have some examples of what they are. But basically, same financial encounter means there was a contact of the same things at the same time. So inpatient contact and the diagnosis in the same instance. You could set a condition where if the person you want have an exclusion condition, you could click on the exclude button, and that panel will be an exclusion criteria. So query name, when you say run query, it's going to pop up a window and say, here are the things that you can put input on. One is a query name. One thing I really want you to focus on is don't just say, okay, please change the query name. It will assign a default query name, which will be some combination of all your constraints and a date. Unfortunately, you will need to remember the query name in order to ask us for data. And if you put something really cryptic, it will be very hard for you to copy and paste and type and make sure that it's correct. So name something that makes sense to you so you can find it later. Otherwise, it's going to put something like cryptic like that on top. And most of the time, you'll be using the number of patients as in cohort number. There are instances where you might want to use patient set. I will explain that later. But most of the time, it will be number of patients, and it will return you a number. And then I explained a little bit about query timeout. After 180 seconds or so, it's going to give you this little message. The query has timed out, but it's going to run in the background, as in it's still running, but you won't get this clock time. So this will keep going until 184. It starts from 0 and then it keeps counting, and you don't want to stare at it, so we stopped at 180. However, for some reason, if you want to increase that, you could do that. There's an option on a query tool. I'm going to go through an example and then show you what these temporal constraints are so that you can get a better idea. So let's say I wanted to get a distinct patient count for someone who visited Harborview with A1C between 4 and 6. So I'm going to go to my query window and clear everything. And then I'm going to search for A1C. And when I hover over it, I know it says lab, chemistry, endocrine. So I know that's the lab value. So when you put that in there, it's going to pop up a window. So you can specify what value you would want. And if you just want someone who tested and you don't care about the value, just leave it at no value. If you want to know between 4 and 6, you want to click on the by value and say between 4 and 6. That was one of the criteria. Now I am getting patients who had A1C between 4 and 6. But I want to know that patient also went to Harborview, which means I want to go to the visit details, or you could search for HMC, and then go to institution and drag the Harborview. And on this example, there is nothing that says it has to be at the same visit, as in anybody who just went to Harborview and anyone who just had A1C, then you leave this timing constraint as just independent. You don't mess with anything if you just want to know someone who went to Harborview who had this lab value at some point. And then you could click on Run Query. So we have like 13,812 people. Obviously, you don't want this many cohort. So we'll move on to the next example. Next example, I want inpatient at Harborview, and only those inpatient visit a Harborview, as in when they visited, they were inpatient. So they have to be visit linked. How do I do that? So I'm going to clear this query, and I want to do the Harborview. And visit type contains an inpatient, so I want only the inpatient who were at the same time in Harborview. And now I want it visit linked, so I want to press and say occurs in the same financial encounter. That is the definition for occurring at the same time. And if you can see that occur at the same encounter is propagated down to the groups, and I will show you next instances where you can actually change the lower level things to be a different type. So you can run that, and I don't want you to be looking at the clock, ticking clocks all the time, so I will show you what that looks like, which is example 2. I saved my queries so you can see it. So it ran about 30 seconds, and there's like 63,000 people in it. And obviously that's big number of people. So third example is finding diagnosis. I want to find patients with diagnosis of IC9 code 250 and anything related to 250, that's diabetes. I believe I've already done this, but I will do it again. So I'll go to find the terms and go to search by code and 250. I found diabetes. I clear my query, and then just drag and drop. And it actually took like 4.7 seconds. So there are about 34,000 people with diabetes. Now we're going to use 3 panels defining BMI, systolic pressures, and UWPN. And it's pretty much same. You find the right examples. So we're trying to find patients who visited UWP, PN, and BMI between 35 and 100. Just a little trick, if you don't want to see all of these things at the bottom for now, if you click on the rightmost button here, it will just show you that panel. So you don't have to. So if you go to vitals, for example, there's a BMI under growth, and this can be changed if you think that's weird. And then we'll do by value in between 35 and 100. And then it will list that. So now to actually the meat of what we have added for infectious disease section. There is on the navigate panel something called ID classification. This is just what we created for infectious disease researchers, because we need to be able to identify if someone tested positive for certain organisms and where. So we have added culture description, which is the one with 2,000 plus list of organisms. And I highly recommend using the find terms to do that. But you can browse if you like. It's alphabetical, I believe. And there's a little thing called ID notes that just tells you whether the person has ID notes or not in 2010 onward. And then specimen description, which is actually in conjunction with the culture description, and it's where the culture was found. Susceptibility right now only has oxacillin 1, but we could add more possibly. And transplant diagnosis and procedure, which is coming also from unbilled fees. And visit details, which I have shown you before. So those are the items that as an infectious disease researchers you probably would take a lot of look at. This is one example that Bob gave me before, so we'll go with it. So patients with Staphylococcus aureus, and then in blood, 2012 HMC. This is where you also need to pay attention to temporal constraint. Remember that box? So how do we do this? So that You probably want to search for the name because you don't want to be going through 2,000 organisms. So you probably want to type Staphylococcus aureus. And it will give you a list. That's what I want. And if you look at this list, some of these items actually are diagnosis and others are the infectious disease category. So you want to kind of hover and make sure you're grabbing the infectious disease one, ID classification. And unfortunately, because this is the list given by lab system, you will need to drag in 6 different things that are Staph aureus if you want to grab everyone that has Staph aureus. Next one is in 2002. What I'm going to do is cheat and actually put in the query that I have already done, so I don't have to confuse you. So I have dragged in 6 items of Staphylococcus aureus. And then I dragged in the blood, which is also under infectious disease item. If you go under specimen description, it will have a blood on there. So I dragged that in. And then I went to the visit details and set harbor view. And notice, you see the little underline on the dates. And I set the date to be 2012 inclusive. So after you have set all of that, if you say go, it's going to return you about 146 people. So in 2012, everyone with positive Staph aureus in blood and HMC. This is where I'm going to remind you. Take a very close look at the top temporal constraint. Do you see that selected term occurs in the same financial encounter? So if you don't do that, anybody who's positive for Staph aureus at any time in 2012, and anybody who had something in blood, and anybody who went to HMC, if any of those conditions are met, that person will be selected, which will result in bigger cohort. If you haven't noticed yet, there's this little thing called analysis tool on the top upper corner. Right. There is 3 little analysis tools available for you, which will graph some of the things and be able to analyze some of the things. It does take a little bit of time, but I want to at least show you how it works. This is when you use the second option when you run query, patient set. And it will save a set of patients so that you can do some analysis on it. So when you do a query, and instead of say number of patient set, it will save a query. For example, if you go to a previous query and click on some of these results, here it says number of patients, right? But if you run a patient set, it will say patient set. And sometimes you want to save that. And I have saved 2 patient sets. And these cannot be large. You want to keep it to about a couple hundred maximum, or maybe a few hundred. Once you save the patient set, and I've saved it here, it will look like patient set for your query, patient set for your query. You could click on the analysis tool, and there are 3 options, demographics 1, demographics 2, or timeline. Demographics 1 will summarize demographics of that patient set for you. So what you want to do is click on the demographic sets, and it says drop a small patient set here. They mean small as in few hundred. If you try to run 1,000, it will like bark and not work. So I'm going to drop in a patient set, and then you could say view results. It's going to process, so I have a screenshot. What it's going to do is show you a demographic summary of your patient set. And it will have age, sex, race, religion, the typical demographic. It will happen in your browser. I have set it to run. It says data is being loaded. Now it has loaded. It took a few minutes. And then you can scroll down and see what is going on. You have religion and how many people are vital, deceased, all that. So it will let you run a little bit of that. The second one is you can drop 2 patient sets where you can compare them. So I have 2 patient sets saved. One is the first one, and then you could drop in the second one, And while it runs, I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's going to show the same one, except it's going to compare them side by side. It's going to have the same bar graph, except it will be 2 bar graphs. So those are the really, really basic demographic analysis that you can do. And there is one more option of analysis. The third one is called timeline. This is where you use a patient set and then you put in some sort of variable, it could be multiple, to see at what point in their timeline between 2010 and now this thing occurred. As in, let's say you had a patient set of 68 people and you want to know if they had ever run a platelet test or if they ever were diagnosed with diabetes at some point. And you drag in the item to the concept. Any concepts within the tree you can drag it in. And it could be multiple, and it will show you multiple concepts. And what it will do, now it came out. This is how it looks like for the 2, just give you an idea. So what it will show you is something like this. Let me give you. Where these are the patients all de-identified, but it will give you a general age. And then you can scroll through patient. I believe I had about 68 people. And you could zoom in on the timeline or zoom out, and it will give you all the occurrences of, let's say for this I chose Staph aureus. So I dragged in 6 items of Staph aureus and asked when did it occur. And for this patient, apparently he got infected quite a lot. For that patient, he only had 1 incidence. So this is a bit of, yeah. So this will kind of give you an idea of during which timeline this happened, only once or frequently and all that. So those are the 3 mini analysis tools that are available with this. There are a couple caveats so that you don't get a completely wrong patient count. One is demographic data. If you're using demographic, any item under demographic ontology, as in the little folder, you need to treat them independently. You could group the other ones. Let's say you want ID node person who has Staph aureus, and you want to group them, and you will be selecting same financial encounter, and you want to group them because you want them together. However, if you want to know if it was a female, the demographic is at the level of a patient, not a visit. If you link them together, you get a 0. So you want to select independently just for demographics, anything that's coming out of demographics. So that is one thing that you should be aware of. So if you get a 0, you could email or call me, but if you remember this part, maybe you won't. Next one is, in order for me to connect infectious disease, all those crazy organisms and specimen together, I had to sort of detach them a little bit from the rest of the tree. As in, if you select anything from infectious disease, they are all linked together. Infectious disease with ID note, specimen, culture description, all of them are linked together. However, they're not linked financially to, for example, unbilled charges or other information. So the only thing you can link together if you're doing an infectious disease section, unfortunately, is link ID node and Staph aureus together. However, if you want to know if the medication was given, unfortunately, right now, at the moment, you'll need to treat them independently and try to date range them. I am sorry to say. It's because of all the complicated linking of organisms, because there's multiple tests run in same financial encounter in order to link the tests together individually so that you don't get an erroneous record. We had to not link them to the big visit info, which is what all the other items are linked in. So everything within here, you want to link by financial encounter. If you go outside, then you might want to, you need to say independent and put a date on it or try to identify a slightly different way. If you don't put a date on it, then it will find anybody with ID node and Staph aureus, Staphylococcus in certain date range or not, and then if they ever got a medicine, for example. Data request process, it's very short. We only have about 3 more slides, so please bear with me here. once your cohort defined as in, oh, I've got roughly 150, I got roughly 200, I want these people. Then what you need to do is go to this incredibly simple website. And then there is a little section that is entirely infectious disease right here. And data request. If you click on it, there's a form that you need to fill out. Depending on QI and research, it's going to ask you for slightly different things. One thing you need to take a note before you data request is please take a note of your query that you wanted. This is just cryptic things, but you would have named your own nice query names. And there will be a part in the form where you put in that query name. Then I can go in and actually find what you queried, and definition can be pulled over. And there are 3 options for requesting data. You could complete a very detailed description of this is what I want exactly, like write down every single little detail. Or pick from something that we already have done. Right now it's a little sparse. What we have already done is also on the website, existing data sets. If you click on it, it should give you a list of what we have available. So one of the items that Bob put together is a huge list that you could get for any cohort of demographics, labs, micro, inpatient meds, and vitals. And the entire list is in here, which is huge. And it will be like a giant matrix, and you will need to know stats to process that. So you could look at it on your own leisure, how many items you can get. So that is one of the options. Other one is a little more of a summary. This was a test case for summarizing demographics for your cohort, or 90-day readmission, or just a sample medication summary. That we have actually coded extra. So that is also available. But right now, other than that, is sparse because no one has actually gone through it. The third option is just to get a de-identified data that is in the DCDR, which is just a big rows and rows of medication, blah, test run the result. And it will be just rows and rows, and you will also need to run that through a stats package, but that is available. So just reiterate, we have some existing queries available, we have some reports available, formats, anything you can think of, we can pretty much produce spreadsheets, online reports, CSVs, any delimited files, and whatever else you can think of.